Hello there. Let's do some practice questions for the CompTIA A Core 2 exam with my explanations and reasoning. Now before we get started, a bit of a disclaimer. Darkbird Tech, this channel, is not affiliated with CompTIA or any of CompTIA's partners. These questions I've put together are meant to give you practice when you're preparing for the exam, but they are not the actual exam questions and answers. That would be a violation of the NDA that we all agreed to when we write a CompTIA exam. And also a violation of CompTIA's unauthorized preparation material policy. These questions, however, are there to give you a similar experience to what you'll get in the exam and how the knowledge can be tested, and that's why it's similar. Now, I have favored medium to difficult style questions in this video to give you a good gauge of how prepared you are for the exam. Now, let's talk about the workflow for this. So obviously I've written the questions for this video, but I'm going to play the role of the voice in your head, and we're going to pretend the questions are from CompTIA. Now, the way it's going to happen is the questions will pop up first. We'll run through the question. If you need to, pause the video at the time so you can have a look at the question at your own leisure rather than waiting for me to read it. And our options will then appear. We will look at the options and work out what the best answer should be for that question. And once we're done with that, we take a sip of coffee before moving on to the next one. So let's get into it. Alright, let's start. Which version of Windows 11 does not support RDP? So let's have a look. We've got Windows 11 Education, Enterprise, Home, and Pro. Now remember, RDP, or the Remote Desktop Protocol, is the remote desktop connection protocol that Microsoft developed so that you can remotely access a Windows computer's graphical user interface. And it would be very weird if the Enterprise Edition didn't support it. So let's cross that out. Remember, we're looking for the version that doesn't support it. Pro, that would also support it more than likely. That leaves us with Windows 11 Home and Education. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't see many home users needing to be able to initiate an RDP connection to somebody else. So I'm gravitating towards that. But what about Education Edition? Well, one easy way to remember the Education Edition of Windows is its Enterprise Edition for schools. So if it's Enterprise Edition for schools, that means it probably would support RDP properly. So Windows 11 Home is the better option here. Now, that doesn't mean Windows 11 Home can't ever support remote connectivity, but it supports remote assistance, not remote desktop connections. Slight difference there. Either way, let's move on. Which of the following would reduce remote attacks that use remote access tools and brute force attacks on credentials at a large multinational organization? Choose 2. Now, as much as I'm sure you'd like to try and plan these options out, this is one of those questions where it would be good to see what options we have. So we've got a total of 6 options. We've got limiting the systems that can be accessed remotely. That sounds good. We've got enabling multi-factor authentication. We've got blocking all support accounts from logging in from foreign countries. We've got deploying a password manager for remote access tool users. We've got enforcing account lockouts after 5 incorrect passwords, and deploying a jump box for remote access users. So all 6 of these are good options. So what we're going to do is look for the best that's going to focus on what we're trying to stop. So we're looking at remote attacks that are using remote access tools and are trying to brute force their credentials to get into the organization. Limiting the systems that can be accessed remotely would be a good idea, but if we are allowing remote access and we haven't got multi-factor turned on, that would be a very, very big risk. So I want to make sure that we're turning on multi-factor before we start doing anything clever. Blocking all support accounts from logging in from foreign countries. This one you've got to be careful. This is a multinational organization. So blocking foreign users and foreign administrators might be a bad idea. If it was not a multinational organization, that could be a good option. Deploying a password manager for remote access tools. Password managers are a bit of a contentious topic. They benefit some groups of users and they aren't good for others. The general approach for whether you should look at using a password manager or not is, are you dealing with end users? If so, do those end users need help managing their passwords, remembering them all, having good complex and varied passwords for different platforms? If it's yes to most of those things, then a password manager makes sense. But for remote access and remote administration, I kind of expect the IT professionals to be a little bit more capable of managing and remembering their own passwords. Remember, passwords are a knowledge factor of authentication, which only you should know. And putting it in a password manager means you and a computer knows that password in a way that could be reversed. So I'm not too keen on that. Locking out an account, though, after 5 incorrect attempts. Yeah, I'm very big on that. So I'm happy with those 2 options, but what about the others? Well, the others we can eliminate because they are a bit more advanced. The approach to this question, or the style of question, is usually get the fundamentals right before you rush off and do anything advanced and clever. And having multi-factor authentication and lockouts for people accessing things remotely would be a very, very good idea. Don't get me wrong, limiting systems that can be accessed remotely, doing regional blocking, password managers, jump boxes, all of those can be very, very useful. But if you haven't got the fundamentals sorted out, then those more advanced and clever options are not going to work out well for us. This is one of those tougher questions in the exam where you've really got to think it through and decide what would be your first point of action. And I would always suggest, when we've got a lot of choices here, get the fundamentals right. So an organization is planning to migrate from their old fleet of computers that could only run 32-bit versions of Windows 10 to 64-bit versions of Windows 11. Okay, so they're replacing some old computers with some new ones by the sounds of it, and doing an OS upgrade at the same time. Which of the following will be the biggest benefit to this migration? So let's see. Think about the options you want to see. I would be hoping to see things that would align with, okay, well, what's the big advantage of going to a modern 64-bit operating system over a not so modern 32-bit operating system? So we've got more CPU features, we've got faster storage options, we've got support for more RAM, and the ability to continue using 32-bit applications. Now, all of these can potentially be advantages of a 64-bit OS. You are going to be able to take full advantage of your CPUs if you've got 64-bit CPUs. And even if you do have a 64-bit CPU, you could run a 32-bit OS, but you're going to lose out on some of the features. Again, 64-bit support means you're going to be able to take advantage of newer and faster storage technologies, like the newer generations of PCIe bus lanes for NVMe storage, so you'd have a better time there. One absolute guarantee is you would have more RAM. 32-bit OSs are limited to 4 gigabytes of RAM, which is not a lot, but it is a limit nonetheless. And being able to carry on using 32-bit applications, oh yeah, you can run 32-bit apps in a 64-bit operating system in general. Windows 11 will probably have some restrictions in place, but you can always turn those off to have better support and capability. So all of these are advantages and benefits. So what we're looking for is, what's the biggest one? The one that's going to be most notable. And that'll probably be option C. The reason why I'd say that would be most notable is a lot of things nowadays battle to run on computers with less than 4 gigs of RAM. And there are situations where even office users, especially in certain job roles like accounting and graphic design and video editing, where a system that's only got 4 gigabytes of RAM is going to be really, really tied down by that. Going to a 64-bit system, you're getting to a point now where you're more likely to run into a limitation on the amount of RAM you can have from your motherboard than the operating system. The other benefits are going to be there, but the users will most notably realize, hey, I can have a laptop or a desktop with more memory now. So that'll be the biggest benefit there for a 64-bit system. You might think, but it's current year. Surely all computers are 64-bit. Remember, we said an organization. Companies, enterprises, and so forth, they don't go and replace their hardware every few minutes just because there's something new and shiny on the market. Next up, which tool would best help a technician identify why a computer is running slower? So yeah, in the A+ Core 2 exam, you are going to get a lot of questions about tools, so be prepared for that. So let's see what tools we have. Resource Monitor, Disk Management, Device Manager, and Event Viewer. So these are all Windows tools. So at least now we kind of know what operating system we're dealing with. Does it make a difference though for us with the question? Not really. Windows is a very common operating system in the workplace. So let's see. What would help us most identify computers running slower? So we're looking at execution, performance, and stuff like that. Disk management, I don't think that's going to help us figure out why a computer's running slower. It would help us figure out why we're running low on storage and possibly troubleshooting a storage availability issue. But we're looking at a performance issue, which is also one of the reasons why I'll probably want to eliminate Device Manager too. Device Manager focuses mainly on our hardware components, both internal and peripherals. So it's more about, does the component work, not how well is it working. Event Viewer could help us, as that will let us review logs. But which logs am I looking for? I would need to know what applications are running and what's consuming what amounts of resources and see if there's any logs pertaining to that. And in that case, Resource Monitor makes more sense for trying to figure out why a computer is running slower. Event Viewer would probably be a secondary to go look at after we've identified what's busy chewing up the CPU, the memory, or whatever it is that's causing this computer to run slowly. Moving along. So a technician needs to move some files they downloaded from the internet from their Windows laptop to a Linux server. The files are small and could be moved using a USB drive. Which file system would work best for the USB drive? So here we're looking at operating system features, and in this case, getting some interoperability between a Windows and a Linux machine. So let's see what file systems they have for us. We've got BTRFS, we've got FAT32, we've got ext4, we've got NTFS. So working through this, NTFS is Windows primarily. And with Linux, support is limited. Depends on the distro you're dealing with, whether it's going to have NTFS support or not. And they don't specify the Linux distro in particular. Now, considering it's a Linux server, if it hasn't got NTFS support enabled already, it might be dangerous to add that just for the sake of copying some files. Then we've got ext4. This is Linux only. Same for BTRFS. Those are only supported by Linux. So if I plug a flash drive into a Windows computer with those file systems on, Windows will probably tell me a new flash drive detected, click here to format. So not a great choice. FAT32, however, is old Windows. I'm talking like really old, but it is universally supported. It can work on pretty much anything. Any operating system, any embedded system can probably read a FAT32 formatted drive. The only problem with FAT32 is you've got file size and drive size limitations, but they did say the files are small. So I'm going to go with FAT32 for the better interoperability. I've come across many Linux distros that do not support NTFS out of the box, and to get NTFS support enabled can sometimes be a bit of a pain in the backside. But I haven't yet come across a Linux distro that does not support FAT32. And although Windows doesn't use FAT32 as its primary filing system, it does support FAT32 formatted flash drives. And the real irony is this. Most of your external flash drives and whatnot are going to come pre-formatted with FAT32 anyway. So that's the best option there. Moving along. An administrator is working on a script to automate an important task on Windows clients and Windows servers. Which of the following file types would guarantee the best compatibility across various Windows machines? So, we're probably going to see some script file types. Give you a chance to think about the options you'd like to see or the option you'd like to see most. But our options are .py, VBS, SH, and PS1. So py, that's Python. VBS is Visual Basic Script. Quite common in Windows, but mainly for MS Office. SH is common for Linux. And PS1 is PowerShell. Now we are looking at Windows machines, specifically clients and servers. So with Python, I could use that, but I'm going to have to install Python. But it would guarantee universal capability. VBS, I've got to make sure Visual Basic is properly installed and supported. And considering a lot of malware designed for Office files that exploit VBS, I'm a little bit reluctant to put that on my servers. SH, I could maybe get that working by enabling the Windows subsystem for Linux, which gives me a born-again shell from Linux in the Windows operating system. But that requires me to go and add something. And as soon as I'm eliminating that, I might as well eliminate Python. PowerShell is the better option. PowerShell has been supported in Windows for a really long time. Microsoft is slowly but surely trying to push us to use PowerShell and stop using command prompt, although I don't think they'll ever completely succeed at that. And if I go and develop a PowerShell script, it will work equally well on a Windows client with a GUI and a Windows server that may not have a GUI. I can just run the PowerShell script from the command line. So PS1 would be the better option. And yes, A+ Core 2 will pick on these things. Remember, it is one of the topics in A+ Core 2, is scripting and automation and stuff like that. Thankfully, though, you will not be expected to be a scripting wizard with just A+ behind your name, but you would be expected to know the basics to get the ball rolling and self-teach on scripting. Moving along to the next question. Which of the following editions of Windows is not able to support BitLocker encryption? Okay, so again, we've got a not able to support something. So let's see what editions they have for us. Home, Pro, Enterprise, and Pro for workstations. Now, BitLocker, which is a full disk encryption service, would definitely be useful in the workplace. So I can definitely see Enterprise supporting it, and I can definitely see Pro supporting it. But we're looking for editions that do not support it. So I'm going to eliminate those two. Home, I'm feeling pretty strong about that, but let's talk about Pro for workstations. Pro for workstations is a little bit more powerful and capable than normal Pro edition. It's got a couple enterprise features that make it good for high-performing workstations, and often comes pre-installed on enterprise workstations, which are obviously sold through enterprise channels. And again, it's Pro edition, so highly unlikely it would not support BitLocker. It's probably going to be Home edition that does not support normal BitLocker. Home edition of Windows does support BitLocker to go, where you can use BitLocker in password mode to encrypt a removable drive, but not for your internal disk, which is what normal BitLocker is. Okay. Looking at the next question. A technician has been tasked with migrating a team of users to Windows 11. They have been asked to preserve the user's files, but to make sure that no problems or issues persist in the new installation. Which strategy would work best? Okay, so let's just quickly look at the key things. We're going to preserve files, but we don't want problems or issues that persist with a new installation. So let's see what the options are. Install Windows 11 using a master image to reduce post-installation setup time. That is something I would like to do in a workplace. I do like to make custom images so that I don't have to do as much work post-installation. But this is not really addressing the whole backing up the user's data. Performing an in-place upgrade. That would definitely give me the user's data being preserved, but it would also let problems from the old setup come through as well. So I'm going to eliminate that mainly because it's going to let problems persist. Backing up the user's data and performing a clean install of Windows, that is normally one of the best ways to bring the old data files, but start with a clean slate, a fresh start with none of the old problems and mistakes that were made in the past. So that's feeling pretty good, because that's addressing both things, preserving the data and eliminating problems from the past. Performing a remote network installation, I don't see how that's going to necessarily help in either case. It does allow a technician to not have to be present, but it's not going to necessarily deal with the keep the files and eliminate the old problems. And that being said, the same would be true for option A, which makes C the better option for us. The backing up preserves the files, and the clean install guarantees no problems from the past come with us into the new version of Windows. So that seems to be the best approach there. Let's move along. Alright, next question is, which of the following file extensions would be used for an application on Mac OS? Now, for those of you who are familiar with Apple, you're going to have an easy time with these questions. Those of you who are not, don't panic. Process of elimination can work here. So let's do both. Let's do a process of elimination. exe, primarily Windows. .deb, that's Linux. Debian and derivatives, specifically. APK, that's Android. Whereas .dmg, yeah, bit of an old type for Mac OS, but still, it is for Mac OS. Quite often it'll be .app as well. That's also quite common now as well. But .dmg is an old type for Apple. So even if you are not familiar with Mac OS, don't worry, you can use process of elimination to try and pick up on it. If I didn't know better, I think CompTIA uses some people's lack of familiarity with something to make these questions harder than they actually are. Moving along though. Next up, which of the following would a video streaming service use to reduce instances of piracy? Interesting. So I'll give you a chance to think about the options you'd like to see. But the options are a EULA, a DRM, terms of service, or an NDA. So end user license agreement, this is more for software, not so much for a service like video streaming. So let's eliminate that. DRM, or digital rights management, it is a type of copyright protection. So this is looking pretty good. Terms of service, in the most simplest wording, is an outline of the service and permissions that the person subscribing or paying for the service is entitled to. So this is also pretty good. An NDA, or non-disclosure agreement, this is more of a legal agreement to stop somebody talking about something important, valuable, and sensitive. So I don't think that's going to help with the piracy issue. Now, both the DRM and the terms of service can be used to deal with instances of piracy for a video streaming service, but the DRM is going to be probably more effective, as it'll prevent people making copies of the stuff, whereas a term of service document is just going to say you're not allowed to do it, but it's not going to do anything active to stop the person pirating any content. So that'll probably be the best fit. So typical in this type of question fashion, we've got two good options, the DRM and the terms of service. But the DRM would probably be the better way to reduce instances of piracy. Not to say that somebody wouldn't find a way around it, but it's definitely going to help to reduce it occurring. Moving along now. Our next question. An organization has determined that many users forget their passwords and resort to using passwords that are too simple or writing their passwords down. Which of the following could the organization implement to improve their security for users logging in? Okay, let's see what options they have. So we've got setting up and enforcing multi-factor authentication, increasing the lockout threshold for incorrect password attempts, implementing biometric authentication, or removing the requirements for users to regularly reset their passwords. So this you've got to be careful with, because if you're being security conscious, as this question starts to make you, you're going to want to choose good security options. Remember, we're looking at user habits and behavior with security in this question. And in this case, we're trying to figure out a way to help the users not forget their passwords. Now, making users do more work with MFA won't help here with this problem. So I want to eliminate that for now. We could bring MFA in later once we figured out how to get the users to deal with their passwords better. Increasing the lockout threshold for the number of incorrect attempts. I don't think that's going to really help the users remember their passwords that much. It's just going to give them more opportunity to try different passwords and also give an attacker more opportunities to try different passwords. So I'm not too keen on that one. So that leaves us with biometrics and removing the requirements for users to regularly reset their passwords. Now this could definitely help, but knowing what people are like, I've been working in the IT industry for more years than I want to count right now. Users will just carry on using a bad password for longer. Whereas biometrics, the person's not going to forget their fingerprint. They're not going to forget their face if you're doing facial recognition. So I'm going to go with, let's do biometrics. Then the users don't have to remember anything. And we also add extra convenience. And once we get the biometrics properly implemented,
and set up, we could then look at maybe doing MFA using something like something user has to have, like an access card or something. So that will probably be the best approach for the situation where we're trying to make authentication easier for the users while maintaining good access control and security. And biometrics would be a pretty good option there. Let's see our next one. A technician is moving a computer acting as a print share server running Windows from the sales department to the finance department. Which control panel application should the technician use to change the IP address, subnet mask, and default gateway settings? So let's see what the options are. We've got Network and Sharing Center, Internet Options, Devices and Printers, and System. Now, here's the thing. The fact that they're talking about it being a print share server is irrelevant. I could have said this is a file share server. I could have said this is a miniature internal web server. It could have been anything. We're talking about moving a Windows computer from one LAN segment to another, one department to another, because most organizations probably would separate their departments into different LAN segments and IP subnets. So we're just talking about changing IP address settings in Windows here. So let's have a squiz. System, definitely not that, nor devices and printers. Remember what I said, the printers was to misdirect you in this question. Watch out for that. CompTIA does this quite often. The two things that are most network oriented here is Internet Options and Networking and Sharing Center. Now, Internet Options mostly pertains to the web browser, not so much the actual end device's settings and configuration. Networking and Sharing Center, tucked away under this, you will find options to change IP settings. That is a better option here. Now remember, they did say control panel applications, not the Windows settings menu that's become quite prevalent with Windows 10 and Windows 11. They're talking about using the control panel to do this. And for the time being, the control panel is still a good way to go about doing this in a very standard fashion, especially if you're dealing with a large variety of Windows operating systems. Let's move on. A user reports that they lost their phone, which has access to work resources, in a taxi. What should the technician do? So our options are remotely track the device, remotely wipe it, attempt to remotely lock it, and attempt to remotely back it up. Now be careful here. You probably want to go with all four of these options in a particular order. In the real world, you would probably want to go and track the device to see if it's recoverable or not. If it's not recoverable, lock it and then try and back the device up before wiping it to make sure that it's got no data or access to anything work related. However, CompTIA is looking for one answer here, and CompTIA's preference here is as soon as the device is out of the user's possession, that you remotely wipe it. This is CompTIA's usual approach to this. This is the CompTIA preferred response. In other situations, you might say, well, let's remotely lock it, remotely track it. And I would agree with you. In the real world, let's be sensible about this. But CompTIA prefers certain answers. And this is probably one of the best bits of advice I can give you. Not just with CompTIA, but any certification vendor. They are going to sometimes want their answer, even if their answer isn't always the best fit in the real world. But for the sake of passing an exam, let's just go with CompTIA's approach here. Mobile devices out of the user's possession, just remotely wipe it. That's always the knee-jerk reaction with CompTIA. Next, which of the following is most likely to use ext4 as its native file system? Oops, I accidentally gave that away earlier, didn't I, with one of the previous questions. But this is the cool thing about CompTIA exams. Because the questions are pulled from a database semi-randomly, you're going to get these situations where sometimes a question you had earlier helps you with a question you get later, and sometimes it also works the other way around, where you get a question later in the exam that can help you with a question you had earlier. This is why I always encourage people, abuse that back button, abuse that flag for review button. It can be a massive, massive advantage in some situations. So, ext4, this is a Linux filing system, so we're going with that. Windows is primarily NTFS, although there are some other file systems that Windows does work with, like for example, you've got the Resilient filing system, and also FAT32 as external. Mac OS uses a variety of Apple-oriented file systems based off of the original Unix HFS. And Android, it's just Android. Linux is the go-to option for the ext4 option here. Cool. Now for another scenario question. A technician has been asked to make sure that all computers of customer-facing employees have a standard wallpaper with the company's logo displayed. Which tool will help them implement this change? So let's see what we get here. So we got system configuration, personalize, task scheduler, and group policy. System configuration and task scheduler definitely wouldn't help with those two things. We're looking at something that would affect a wallpaper change. Now, you might be thinking, well, personalize, and from there you can go and set your wallpaper. But group policy could also be used to do this as well. With group policy, you can do a group preference, and in that you can set a wallpaper. Now, from an organizational perspective, if all of the computers are in a domain, and I'm assuming they are because they're saying as a company in the question here, it would probably be a lot quicker and easier to do it with group policy, and also to do it very consistently. Because every time that computer reboots or turns on or someone logs in, group policies are freshly downloaded and applied, and then regularly every 91 to 180 minutes thereafter. So this would guarantee that even if the users did change it to something else, it would change back to the standard wallpaper after a while. And the users will give up eventually and just leave it be. So that would be a great way just to make sure that all the computers look correct. Personalize would definitely work, but you'd have to do this one at a time, and you'd have to keep redoing this if the users can undo that setting. Group policy would probably be better. I could prevent the users from making the change and set the wallpaper to something static. And the assumption I'm making here is they are saying a company, and most companies do run a domain. Next, we have another scenario. After inserting a new peripheral, a computer shut down immediately. After removing the peripheral and booting the machine, all appeared normal. What Windows tool would help diagnose and troubleshoot what occurred? Task Manager, Event Viewer, Device Manager, and Devices and Printers. Straight off the bat, I'm eliminating Task Manager. This is not something that is continually running, or an application that's open or anything like that. Task Manager would help me with a software-related issue. This is a hardware-related issue. So let's eliminate Task Manager from that. We have Event Viewer, Device Manager, and Devices and Printers. Now, the problem with both Device Manager and Devices and Printers is we need to have the peripheral plugged in, but this peripheral caused the computer to shut down immediately. So although pretty good options for troubleshooting devices, we are challenged. Whereas Event Viewer lets us see logs, and we could go and find the logs for the hardware and the shutdown that occurred when we plugged in the peripheral. So Event Viewer would probably be more helpful in troubleshooting because we would see, okay, what sequence of events occurred, what logs happened when we plugged in that peripheral and the machine shut down. Device Manager would be useful if we could plug the device in without the computer shutting down. And Devices and Printers, that's for user-friendly, non-technical review of peripherals. And probably wouldn't help us much in this situation. So Event Viewer is going to help us because it's going to give us log evidence that we can use for troubleshooting. Next, which of the following commands on Windows would allow you to identify the contents of the current folder? And yes, you do want to get comfortable with commands. Even though on Windows you can do a lot through the GUI, command line skills are going to pay off in the long term as an IT professional. So, what commands do we have? We've got ls, we've got pwd, we've got dir, and we've got cd. Now, very quickly, because I know my commands, I'm going to eliminate some because we're talking about a Windows system here. ls and pwd are Linux commands, so we can eliminate those straight away. But those of you that do remember your Linux commands from that section, A+ will say, but hang on, ls shows me the contents of a directory, and a directory is a folder, right? Yes, that is true. But this is for Linux, so that's definitely a no. pwd, another Linux command that just says what is the current working directory you're in, not the contents. So that leaves us with dir and cd. Cd is present in pretty much every command line I've seen for Windows, Linux, Mac OS, etc. And that lets you change directory. So not what we're after here. The dir command is what's left over. And for those of you that remembered, dir is the command in Windows. It shows the contents of the current directory or folder. So dir is our option here. So, which of the following operating systems would you likely find on laptops, desktops, and servers, but not on mobile devices like smartphones and tablets? So we're looking for something that works on a laptop, a desktop, or a server, but not on a phone or a tablet. So let's see what we have here. So we've got Windows, Linux, Mac OS, and Android. Now straight away you can eliminate Android because that's smartphones and tablets. We said laptops, desktops, and servers. Mac OS I'm also eliminating because Mac OS will be laptops, desktops, but not necessarily servers. Apple kind of gave up on trying to do servers a while ago. So that leaves us with Linux and Windows. Now, Windows, yeah, you're going to find that on most common laptops for sale, most desktop computers, and Windows Server does exist. Linux can also run on all three, but we asked here, what would you likely find? Windows is more likely to be found on all three than Linux. Linux is very, very common on the server ecosystem. In fact, most public servers on the internet are running Linux, and a lot of cloud provider data centers run Linux to make their cloud data centers work. But the Linux desktop user is very uncommon and rare for a variety of reasons. Windows, however, very prevalent in the laptop desktop space for clients, and pretty popular in the workplace because it just makes it easier for a Windows client to talk to a server when they're both running the same base operating system. So Windows is the more likely to be found on those three kinds of computers compared to the other three operating systems. So we have a user reporting that they are unable to use their computer, as there is a window telling the user to pay someone using a cryptocurrency to regain access to their files. A technician is dispatched and verifies that the user is infected with ransomware. What should be the first thing the technician does? Let's see. So, option A, trigger all antivirus installations to update their definitions. That would be a good idea in case we're worrying about this spreading. Begin wiping the user's computer and restoring from a backup. Not a bad option. A lot of people encourage that we do not negotiate with ransomware attackers, that we rather recover from backup. Quarantining the user's computer from the network and removable storage as well that gets plugged in or plugged out of their computer. And initiating payment to unlock the user's files. Alright, so first of all, let's start working through what would be the best option. So all can be good under the right circumstances. Getting all the other computers in the organization to update their antivirus to try and stop it taking hold on other machines, that would be a good thing to do. Begin wiping the user's computer and restoring from a backup would be good if backups are being performed regularly, and we can be pretty confident that the ransomware has not infected the backups as well. A very common strategy with ransomware attackers right now is that they'll infect and then they'll wait and wait and wait before they trigger their ransomware. That way there's a very good chance the ransomware becomes part of the backup. If we try to restore from the backup, they just have to re-trigger it, and then we're back to square one. Quarantining the user's computer and any removable storage that goes in or out of it would probably be the better option here. Initiating payment, I'd avoid that if I can. Now the reason why I'm going for option C is generally whenever you get a question in the exam to do with malware and response to malware, the order of response according to CompTIA and most security vendors as well is to observe the symptoms, which we now already have as ransomware, and then quarantine the system so that it doesn't spread to other machines. Once it's quarantined, then we could maybe update all of the other systems antiviruses with less pressure and urgency. And we could look at maybe testing a recovery in a VM to see if there is any ransomware lurking in the backups. But quarantining would be the first point of order to make sure that the security incident does not get worse. So quarantine is the best option here. I would avoid initiating payment. I would wait on these other two. We do them, but rather wait to quarantine. Otherwise, we're sorting out one computer while the ransomware is spreading to another 3 or 4. And we're always going to be on the back foot then. So quarantine to stop it spreading and getting worse. Next up, which of the following is suitable for a business Wi-Fi network, but not a home Wi-Fi network when it comes to security? So let's see. we've got WPA2-802.1x, WPA3-PSK, WPA2-PSK, and WEP. Alright, so first of all, WEP is a bit of a red herring. This is not suitable for anyone's security anymore. WEP has been very, very vulnerable for many, many years. So we'd avoid this no matter what kind of wireless network we're dealing with. So that leaves us with WPA2 and WPA3. Now, we're looking for something that's good for the business, but not great for the home network. Both WPA2 and WPA3 PSK would be good for both home and work, especially home though, because PSK is a pre-shared key, which is that passphrase method of authenticating and encrypting your wireless communications. 802.1x requires a network access control server, such as Radius, to require a user to provide a username and their own password to authenticate, connect, and encrypt their communications wirelessly. So this requires a server. This would be great for the workplace, better security, individual credentials, wonderful, but terrible for a home network because who, besides people like us, are going to go through the effort of setting up a Radius server and getting their wireless and all of their wireless clients to authenticate with unique credentials? 802.1x, whether it be for WPA2 or WPA3, is more work-oriented than home-oriented. PSK, or pre-shared keys, sometimes referred to as personal mode, would be better for the home environment, but could also be used in the enterprise environment too, if you're not too worried about your wireless security. Now, why did I eliminate WPA3? Well, it is the better security, but we're looking for wireless security that's better on the work network, not so much for the home network. And it was more the whole 802.1x PSK that they were testing us on here, rather than the actual standard of the wireless encryption. And for the same reason, that's also why WEP was eliminated, because WEP is a bit of a red herring. It is not asking us how secure a protocol is, it's asking us which one is more suitable in the work versus the home environment. So that's that answer. Moving along. A proposed change was not approved of by the CAB. Now, if you can't remember, what the hell's a CAB? Change Advisory Board. The people that decide whether a change is approved or not. Alright, so restarting that sentence. A proposed change was not approved by the CAB, citing concerns around the change failing with insufficient recovery options and methods. What can be reviewed and improved upon to get the change improved? When a CAB rejects a change, it's not an outright you can never do this. It's more a case of finish your homework properly, plan this out properly. So let's see. The benefits list, risk assessment, change methodology, and the rollback plan. So their main concern is recovery options and methods. That sounds like the rollback strategy or the rollback plan. The benefits list would not really have anything to do with the whole, okay, can we undo the change? So no. Risk assessment, kind of, but this is more risks of doing the change, risks of not doing the change, stuff like that. Change methodology, bit of a distraction because the word method appears in both, but no. Change methodology is how we're going to implement the change. Here they're looking at recovery as the main thing, which makes the rollback the option and not the change methodology. And you are going to become very intimate with change control and change approvals and stuff like that when you get into the IT industry, because almost any significant alteration you make will be subject to a change of some kind. The good news is the workplace that you land up in should normally have the processes outlined, and you just go through them, and you should be fine. Next, a user has brought their personal Windows laptop to work. Emphasis on the word personal. The BYOD policy allows for this. Cool, I'm glad to hear this organization's got a BYOD policy. The technician is, however, unable to get the laptop to join the domain. What could be the cause of this? This is interesting. So we've got the laptop is lacking critical security updates and is being blocked due to this. Then for option B, we have the laptop has a home edition of Windows installed. Option C, the laptop needs to be connected via Ethernet for the enrollment process. And option D, the MAC address is being blocked. Okay, so let's start eliminating some things that this could not be. And the first one I want to eliminate is option D, Because if the laptop's MAC address was being blocked, we would not even be able to get on the network. And the technician is saying they're having a problem with getting this to join the domain, but they don't specify any other communication problem. So I'm going to go with the MAC address is not the problem here. The laptop needs to be connected via Ethernet for the enrollment process. They never specified they were on wireless. And in my experiences, I have never seen it required that you be on Ethernet for a computer to be joined to the domain. Now, I'm not saying it can't be done. You can do various types of network policies and restrictions to prohibit devices being enrolled wirelessly. But I think that would be kind of dangerous to do nowadays, as most laptops are not coming out with Ethernet connections anymore. So I'm not super happy about option C. A and B are quite probable. So you can do something called network health or network access control with health checks, where a device joining the network can be assessed by a network health service that checks to see whether it's got the right security updates or patches applied or whatever. And in this case, that could be the situation because we are looking at a personal device. But then the technician would probably be getting some sort of error message, hopefully, from the network access control service, as opposed to just not able to join the domain. What is more likely here is it's a home edition of Windows, as this is the user's personal device. And home editions of Windows have problems with joining the domain. You can sometimes find workarounds for it, but generally with a proper Windows domain, it will allow Windows Pro Edition and Windows Enterprise Edition. So I'm going to gravitate towards it being a home edition, being the cause of the issue, not so much the updates. It's the more direct, more obvious, more straightforward cause of this issue. All right. Next up, another scenario. A technician has been asked to go set up a new wireless router at a staff member's home as part of an initiative to make remote users more secure. What is the first setting that should be changed when the technician unboxes and connects the new wireless router? So let's see what the options are. Changing the Wi-Fi SSID, changing the wireless encryption mode, changing the default passwords, and changing any firewall options. All four of those are good things to do and stuff we definitely want to do for a secure wireless router. And this is very, very common you're going to get in the CompTIA exams, especially Core 2 for A+, where they are giving us options that are all good, but they're asking us what would we do first? What should be the number one thing I change straight away as quickly as I can so that my security is immediately improved and I don't forget about doing that thing either. But what about the scenario? The scenario is just nice, but ultimately you could condense it down to how should somebody set up a secure wireless router at home? And the first thing you should be doing is changing your default passwords. Those default passwords are for admin and general access. The SSID definitely would change it. The wireless encryption definitely would change it. But what's going to be more secure is to have the admin credentials locked up. Sitting with default SSID and encryption just makes it easier for your neighbors to find out how to hop onto your Wi-Fi for free. But even if they do, they still can't change any settings now, can they? Now, that's not me saying I wouldn't do those things. I would do the other things as well. I'd change the SSID to something that indicates this is this person's network. I'd do the wireless encryption as securely as I could. And if present firewall options, I would set those up. But those would not be my first three things to do. I would want to change the default passwords for admin control, because usually these home routers come with some crappy username and password that's very easy to find out or even guess. And then I would make sure I get that done so I don't forget about it. Then we can move on to the nicer, more interesting things like giving the person a cool name for their network, giving them some good security and all of that. So recapping here, when you get questions in the exam where all of the options are correct, remind yourself, what are they looking for? Are they looking for the best option? Are they looking for the first thing you would do? Stuff like that. It's a very common strategy in CompTIA exams, especially CompTIA A+ at Core 2. Moving along. Next question. Which of the following commands can be used in Linux to install a new application called app-xyz? By the way, be prepared for these arbitrary weird names in the CompTIA exam. Alright, so we've got 4 Linux options here. I hope you're comfortable with your Linux commands, at least your basic ones. So we've got apt update, apt install app XYZ, sudo apt install app XYZ, and sudo apt update. So because they're doing apt here, this tells me it is a Debian distro. So we're not going to be eliminating based on the Linux distro or anything like that. What we are going to eliminate though are the update options, because those are not about installing applications, those are about handling the update and upgrade of your existing installed applications. So that leaves us with apt install app XYZ and sudo apt install XYZ. And you want to do the sudo option. The reason why is installing an app is an admin task. And sudo gives any command you run in Linux the privilege to run with the admin or the root user's account. This command on its own, apt install app XYZ, would probably error out without the privileges. So it's the sudo apt install app XYZ that we're looking for here. So they actually tested us on two things here. Do you know your Linux commands, and do you know how to give your commands admin privileges? Moving along there. Next up, an attacker has managed to get an online retailer's website to display out-of-stock items. What type of attack has been performed? So we've got zero-day exploits, XML injection, keylogging, and SQL injection. Okay, so let's look at the options and the attack as we go through this. So an attacker has managed to get a retailer's website to display out-of-stock items. Now, usually for an online retailer, you'll have a web front end that speaks to a database. And this is what the customer is engaging with. Now, it's not necessarily a zero-day exploit because they didn't specify any applications or unknown vulnerabilities in software. So I'm going to eliminate that. Keylogging, that's spying on people. That's capturing keyboard input. This is not what they've just described. So it's not keylogging. It's definitely an injection attack because the attacker has definitely done something to the web server that injected or passed something through to the back-end server. And considering it's a database that's normally on the back end of a retail website, I'm inclined to believe it's SQL because the structured query language is a database language. XML, I find it weird if a retailer is using XML to store data about their stock levels and products that they have in stock. So it's definitely an SQL injection. Now, if you're worried, wouldn't this be more of a security plus type of question? Technically, yes, but CompTIA is bringing security a lot more into things like A+ and Network Plus because good cybersecurity knowledge and fundamentals matter from the very early stages of your career. And waiting until you get to Security Plus, which is a couple certifications away from now, could be kind of bad and dangerous. So it's going to feel a bit tough when you get these security questions, but I promise you it does get easier over time. Moving along there. For our next question, an iOS user has installed an update for an internally developed application, but the app is failing to load. What can a technician do to try and resolve this? So let's see what the options are. Clear the app cache, reinstall the application, turn off the MDM app, or clear the browsing cache. So the first big deal here is this is an internally developed application. So that means there are going to be some interesting problems and bugs you might not see with other apps from an app store that are developed and more thoroughly tested before being released to the public en masse. So let's have a look. I don't think turning the MDM off will help. If they had an MDM installed already, which I'm assuming because that's an option, and the app was fine before the update, then I don't think turning the MDM off is going to make much of a difference here. Alright. Clearing the browser cache? Well, that depends. Is this a browser app or is it a standalone app? But I highly doubt clearing the browser cache will make much difference because that is the legit web browser on iOS, probably Safari, unless the person's installed a third-party one. Reinstalling the app could solve the issue, but if they did the update, that was sort of like reinstalling. Clearing the application cache, though, that would probably be the easier start because this would require no reinstallation. And there might be data cached from the previous version that's causing an issue with the new version. So I'm inclined to go with that because it's going to be the less impactful troubleshooting approach. General advice for troubleshooting is to always try solutions that change as little as possible and alter as little as possible. That way, if one of those light touch solutions tends to solve the issue, you're not going to have too many side effects and new problems popping up. Reinstalling the app, that would be my second point of call. But because we've got a minimal touch option like clearing the cache, if that doesn't work, then I'd try reinstalling the app. If that didn't work, I'd try moving on to something else, although I doubt C and D would be good options for that. Let's move along to our next question. A graphic designer regularly needs to download large files to their laptop. They will begin the download, lock their laptop, and step away. When they return, the laptop has gone into a power saving state and interrupted the download, even if they are on the charging cable. What Windows setting could be changed to resolve this? Okay, so let's see what the options are. Ease of Access Center, Screensaver, Power Options, and Security and Maintenance. Now, I'm not going to get too hung up over the fact this is a graphic designer. We're looking at the fact that the person is starting a download of a large file, locking and leaving their laptop, and then it goes into power saving mode. Very common thing. So let's have a look. Ease of Access Center, that's more around disabilities and challenges with using a computer. Whether it be your eyesight, your hearing, although that's not really a big issue for using a computer, or the motor control of your hands. So I don't think that's going to make much difference. They're locking their laptop, so I don't think security and maintenance is an issue. Screensaver and power options are my go-to options here. But the screensaver is not going to really play a big part because they're locking and leaving their computer. The power options, though, will play a big part here. Because under your power options or your power plans, as it used to be known, you can set how long before the screen turns off, how long before the computer goes into hibernation, and being a laptop, you can set it for when it's on battery or when it's on the charging cable. So I would suggest going there and then not worrying too much about the screensaver. Because with the screensaver kicking in, the computer's still on and any background activity carries on. But if the computer goes into a power saving mode, then obviously background activity is suspended. So the power options make more sense here to solve this issue. Let's move along. Next up, which of the following macOS tools can be used to perform backups? Mission Control, Time Machine, Preferences, and Disk Utility. Those of you who are familiar with macOS will straight away go to Time Machine. Those of you who are not, well, think about it. Time Machine, going back in time, backup, taking your data back in time. Makes sense. System Preferences, that's just your general system settings. Disk Utility, that's like disk management in Windows. Might be storage oriented, but it's got nothing to do with the performing of backups. And then you've got Mission Control, which is more around your multitasking and application control. Next up, an organization is experiencing an overwhelmingly large amount of traffic that is causing a critical server to go offline. Which of the following attack describes this situation? Choose two. Okay. So adware, denial of service, ransomware, distributed denial of service or DDoS, worm, and Trojan. So let's see. Overwhelmingly large amount of traffic. That describes denial of service and disputed denial of service. Those two options are pretty good for this. Now you might be saying, but it can't be both at the same time, can it? Well, they never specified whether the attack is coming from one source or multiple sources. But both do involve large amounts of traffic that would overwhelm and potentially take a system offline that's being targeted. It won't be adware, because adware is about forcing advertising onto you. Ransomware is all about locking your system up with encryption and making you pay money to get your data back, or at least trying to. A worm is a type of malware that is self-contained and spreads on its own, and a Trojan is a type of malware that's normally embedded into a legitimate application. So DDoS is the most applicable here. Another way to look at this is they don't specify that it's an attack involving malware. Adware, ransomware, worms, and Trojans are all malware. DDoSes are service exploits, but not necessarily malware driven. Apart from the DDoS possibly needing a botnet, but now you've got a botnet, and the botnet's not only for DDoS attacks. You can use a botnet for several other things. Sorry, I'm over-analyzing this. Let's save that for Security Plus. Now, which of the following network technologies can be used to logically isolate users in the same switched network? Ooh, bit of a tough one. So we've got DHCP, firewalls, VLANs, and IDSs. So DHCP, that is all about allocating IP addresses, subnet masks, gateways, and other information to clients. But it's not going to do much to isolate them. It's just about giving them the addresses to communicate. Now, what they have described here does sound like a security feature, but so do VLANs. Intrusion detection systems, they're not going to do anything about isolating. An intrusion detection system will pick up on malicious activity in a network and alert you to it, but it won't actually go and effectively isolate anybody. So that leaves us with firewalls and VLANs. So let's review the question again. Which of the following network technologies can be used to logically isolate users on the same switched network? So we're looking at switches specifically here, and that makes me gravitate towards VLANs, because VLANs are a switch technology that allows me to create software-defined or virtual LANs that sit on top of my physical LAN or my physical set of switches. A firewall, although it does use to logically isolate people, firewalls usually work by the IP level, at the routing level. So I'm less inclined to go for the firewall. I'm more inclined to choose a VLAN for this. Now, the good news is you don't have to know too much about VLANs at A+ level. The only reason why CompTIA is making this part of A+ now is so that when you see it in Network Plus, it's not the first time that you've heard about it, seen it, etc., which makes the learning of how they work in Network Plus a lot easier. So don't lose too much sleep over, but this is confusing. It is confusing, especially when you're new to it. I remember when I first learned VLANs. They freaked me out a little bit. Took me a while though, and I got my bearings with it. And if you come for my Network Plus series, you'll have a better time understanding VLANs with me. Anyway, let's move forward. Ooh, a big scenario. The CEO's laptop has a hardware fault, and it will take a day for the replacement part to arrive. The CEO needs the laptop before the end of the day as they are flying out to a conference. The technician moves the HDD to an identical laptop model they have in stock as a spare. However, when the technician tries to boot the laptop, they are met with a drive encryption prompt. What does the technician need to continue resolving the CEO's problem? So let's see. The UEFI password, domain admin credentials, the CEO's password, or the BitLocker recovery key. Now, first of all, a technician should not need anyone's password to troubleshoot and fix a problem. The technician should have their own account with their own credentials that has the privileges and authorization to do what they need to do to fix an issue. Would they need domain admin credentials? Possibly, but not really. What we're seeing here is a prompt for a drive encryption service, and I'm thinking BitLocker straight away. This is a CEO's laptop, so this is a big organization, and very strong chance that they've got BitLocker to prevent hard drive theft as a way of stealing data. But the thing is, if you run BitLocker in TPM mode, it relies on that TPM chip on the motherboard. When you transplant that storage disk to another computer, it doesn't see that TPM chip anymore. It might see a new one, but it's going to have different details and it won't have the decryption key in it. And BitLocker automatically fails over to recovery mode. So I would say they probably need the recovery key to bypass it. The UEFI password, I doubt that's the issue, and domain credentials I doubt is the issue because they're not successfully booting Windows. So I'm not too worried about the domain admin credentials. They need the BitLocker recovery key. Now that BitLocker recovery key would allow the technician to disable BitLocker so that the computer can boot successfully, and then you just need to re-enable BitLocker, and that'll turn it back on, but this time using the new TPM module as the way of knowing, oh, I'm in a safe and trusted computer. So that would be a good solution to this problem. And the only reason why I would say we go through this exercise is it's the CEO, first of all, and they tend to be kind of demanding and expect us to bend over backwards. And secondly, they've got a good reason to need a transplanted drive because they're going to a conference and they can't wait for the replacement parts so they can get their original computer up and running. So I think that would be the ideal solution. Add to that as well, it's apparently an identical laptop model, which means drivers and stuff like that wouldn't be too much of an issue. Next up, a technician is upgrading hardware in a server. They are concerned about damage from electrostatic discharge. And I don't care what videos you've watched, electrostatic discharge can cause issues, and the damage is not always going to be evident straight away. It can take months or even years for the damage to manifest. Besides which, if you damage a server component which can cost a lot of money, and you're expected to pay for that replacement part, I personally don't want that coming off my paycheck. I don't know about you. So, which of the following would be best to resolve this concern? And generally, electrostatic precautions are usually very cheap and easy to deal with. So, a battery backup, thermal paste, an ESD wrist strap, or an anti-static mat. Okay, so first of all, the battery backup and the thermal paste have got nothing to do with electrostatic discharge. The wrist strap and the anti-static mat, they do, however. Now, the thing is, they're working on a server. You might not take the server out of the rack. A lot of servers have these rail kits that let you pull them out, open the top lid, and work on them right there and then, without having to unmount them from the rack fully, which, considering how much some of these things weigh, is a blessing. An anti-static wrist strap would probably be ideal, because you put that on your wrist, preferably your non-dominant hand, clamp that to the chassis of the computer, and you're grounded. The anti-static mat would be useful on a workbench, but that doesn't deal with the static buildup in the technician's body. So if I had to choose between one of those two anti-static precautions, I would pick the wrist strap each and every time. So that would be the best solution there. And please do not trust the influences that say electrostatic discharge is not real. It is real, and when you're dealing with things like servers, you're dealing with much more expensive, much more sensitive equipment. Consumer electronics, like what you'd find on a desktop or a laptop, are often made a bit more anti-static proof or resistant because they're going to get handled possibly without the right precautions there. But servers, we expect a bit more due diligence. So, yeah. The precaution costs very little money. A wrist strap is a very inexpensive thing, and the extra step it requires out of you is a moment of extra consideration, which can be far better than just trusting that I'm sure that they designed the thing to be resilient. Next up, a junior administrator has downloaded a Linux shell script that can perform a complex task for them. The administrator is not familiar with Linux. That scares me. And has not read through the script, which wouldn't surprise me if you're not familiar with something. You often don't want to read through the complexities if you don't understand them because it makes you feel stupid, and yeah. What is the largest risk associated with this? Oh, I can think of many risks. Let's see which ones CompTIA is giving us to work with. The script is performing unintended system changes. The script could be adding malicious code or configuration. The script could be altering unrelated things that could lead to other services being impacted, and the script may be violating policy and compliance. Oof, all four of these are true. Somebody downloading a script of any kind and running it without checking it, reading through it, whatever, is dangerous and can lead to all four of these outcomes. So we're looking for the largest risk associated with this. And for me, the largest risk feels like this one here, option B, where the script could be adding malicious code or configuration. Yeah, I could see that happening. Somebody puts together a Linux shell script, uploads it, hoping that somebody downloads it off the internet and uses it without checking it. That could very easily enable things that makes for a very easy to breach Linux machine. So I'm feeling that one. Now, don't get me wrong. Unintended system changes is a consequence of this, because this script could be changing a bunch of things, including the thing the technician or administrator, wants to be doing. But some of those things could be security concerning. The script could also be altering unrelated things that could lead to other problems. Yeah, that's very possible. A and C are very closely linked. And if it's a security violation, then the script would be violating policy and compliance requirements. But the largest risk would be the script goes and creates a backdoor for a hacker. That would be my biggest concern. The others would also be concerns, and all of which would be alleviated by either this junior administrator sitting down, reading through the script, and looking at every single thing it's doing and finding out what each of those things means and what it leads to. If they are not prepared to do this, then they must find somebody who is familiar with Linux and run through the script with them to make sure that they fully understand what's being done. But a general best practice would usually be, if you want to script something on your systems, whether it's Linux, Windows, or whatever, that you rather write your own script. Nothing wrong with downloading a script off the internet, but rather use it as a reference source than actually running it. I would download a script, look at what it does, and then recreate that in my own script so that I've got inspiration and ideas from the script I downloaded, but the one that's actually going to execute and run on my systems, that's my work, which obviously leads to a lower chance of the script being dangerous. Now, if you were sitting with this kind of question in the exam and you sit there going, but all of these are major concerns, true. Remember, largest risk is what we're after here. Common tactic in the A+ Core 2 exam is to give you a bunch of valid options, and you've got to figure out what's the first, what's the best, what's the biggest, what's the least, whatever it is they're asking for. And for me, that would be, it's adding malicious code. Next up, a customer brings in a gaming computer that is experiencing poor frame rates when they play games that were released recently. Which of the following would most likely improve the computer's performance? Now, for those of you who are into playing video games, especially on a desktop, you've probably got a couple of ideas already. So we could look at upgrading the CPU, we could look at installing liquid cooling, we could install additional RAM, or we could upgrade the GPU. Now, options A, C, and D are direct performance improvements. We're upgrading to a better CPU, we're getting more RAM, we're getting a better graphics card. Option B can indirectly improve performance by helping keep the CPU cooler for longer. But let's have a look. They're playing games and they're experiencing poor frame rates. The graphics card is the most likely to improve the performance the most. The CPU, some video games would benefit from an upgraded CPU depending on how the game is designed. We refer to some games as being CPU bound and other games as being GPU bound. And basically what it means is, does the CPU or the graphics card or GPU make a bigger difference in overall game performance? But considering they spoke about frame rates, it's probably the graphics card is battling to keep up with the settings and the game and everything. So getting them a better graphics card would probably solve the issue. Besides which, you can go with a CPU that is quite a few generations old and still have a great gaming experience as long as your graphics card is somewhat up to date. Additional RAM, once you get past a certain amount of RAM, it's not going to make that much difference to the game. And yeah, the CPU is sort of a good option, but not completely here. And the liquid cooling would be a good option in the long term for CPU performance, unless you go for a custom cooling loop, which includes the GPU. But now we're really overcomplicating that. And this is one of the things we want to watch out for in these CompTIA exams, is that we don't overcomplicate our solution to the problem. If you find that you're convincing yourself that every option is good, take a moment, think about it, and don't take too many assumptions or too many extra steps. A graphics card upgrade would be the most direct, straightforward way of improving frame rates and graphical experience. So that's probably the better option in this case. Next, which of the following can be used to run a script in Windows? Choose two. Terminal, Bash, CMD, PowerShell, Xterm. Alright, I'm hoping a lot of you have gravitated towards CMD and PowerShell, as these are both Windows command line utilities. Terminal, that's normally the name of the command line interpreter for a Linux system with a graphical user interface. Bash, that is a shell for Linux. Xterm, that is another terminal emulator for Linux, specifically if you're running on the X Windows system directly. So they were looking for Windows. That means Command Prompt and PowerShell, or CMD and PowerShell are your two best options here. And yes, you can launch your scripts from the command line. Users need a secure remote access solution for when they are away from the office, whether it be working from home or at a customer's premises. What solution should be deployed? So we've got a VPN server, an HTTPS web portal, file replication, or a private cloud. So users need secure remote access for when they're working from either their home or a customer's premises. A private cloud, that's not necessarily going to make the remote users any more or less secure. It would be great for security of the cloud, but not necessarily access to it. File replication, that would be useful to synchronize data, but that doesn't necessarily improve the security. It just means data would be replicated when the user returns to the workplace. So not a great option for remote access. We're looking for remote access specifically. An HTTPS web portal, that could be useful as the HTTP protocol is being secured with TLS, hence HTTPS, and then that could be the way the user logs in. But probably what would be more secure and a conventional solution for remote users would be to have a VPN for them and have a VPN server at the office that they can connect to and then access the work resources as though they were locally connected. An HTTPS portal could still be part of the equation, but a VPN server is the better option here for a remote user. Next up, a company security policy requires that all user data must remain encrypted while at rest, which is just the cool way of saying being stored. A technician has been asked to apply this policy to the call center, which operates around the clock with shifts. Multiple call center agents share a Windows desktop computer between shifts. So that probably means that when shift 1 finishes and shift 2 comes along, someone else is sitting at that same computer. Which encryption solution should the technician consider using? So they can use File Vault, EFS, BitLocker, and BitLocker to go. Alright, so let's start eliminating. BitLocker and BitLocker to go, I'm not keen on either of those two options. BitLocker to go is for removable media, which is not being discussed here. BitLocker works at shutdown and startup, encrypts the whole drive as it shuts down, decrypts the entire drive as it starts up, assuming everything is fine. And being a 24-hour call center operating with shifts, I don't think those computers are being shut down very regularly. What I'm expecting is people to be signing in and out of this computer. And for that reason, I'm liking EFS, because with EFS, you can specify which folders get encrypted, and then as you log in, folders you have access to get decrypted. As you log out, those folders become encrypted. And when someone else logs in, folders they have access to that have been encrypted with EFS decrypt, and the ones that you had access to that they don't remain encrypted. So EFS is the better option here. File Vault, nah, not feeling that one. EFS is the better option, especially considering they're talking about Windows here. And File Vault is a macOS utility, hence why I eliminated it. So EFS is the right option here. Now, be prepared for this kind of thing in the exam, where you get a couple questions that prime you of this is a good choice, this is a good choice, this is a good choice. And then a scenario might pop up where what you've been primed to think of as a good choice is not the good choice in that scenario. In this case, where I'm going to have multiple people sharing a computer, EFS is better to keep each person's data encrypted separately. I could still have BitLocker in case the hard drives get stolen, but to achieve what they want here, where all user data gets encrypted while it's not being used, EFS would probably work better on a shared machine. Alright, so that's probably the best option given this question. Let's move along. An organization has a department of users who need to have their IP addresses assigned statically when at work, but will also be expected to work from home regularly. The users are using Windows. Okay, how can their network settings be configured to allow this? Oof, those options are big. Set up the general IPv4 properties to obtain an IP address automatically, and the alternate configuration to use the static IP address. Create a script that will detect the network location from Windows and change the IP address settings from DHCP to the required static IP addresses needed. That could work. Sounds like a lot of extra work, but anyway. Teach the users how to adjust the setting on their own and provide them with the specific details about which IP settings to use. You could also do that, but I'm not too mad because that would require me to give the users admin rights, and you might not trust that. Plus, relying on the users to do something technical is always a danger, because they can easily make a mistake and cause new problems. Ensure the users are using the same IP address scheme on their small office, home office networks to allow the static IP address to work at the office and at home. You could do that, but now you're telling the user to go and change their home network, and you might not have the authority to tell the person to change their personal property just to comply with work. Believe it or not, people are employees, not slaves. People have rights. So I'm not too keen on that. Besides which, What if the user is visiting their family? Now you're going to get their family to use the same addressing scheme. You're pushing the boundaries a bit here. So options A and B seem the better options. Now, let's run through what we have here. The user's home network is likely running a DHCP service. Almost every home router I've ever come across runs DHCP by default, so your average home user just needs to cable up, connect, and they've got internet at home. Beautiful. And option A seems like a good option here, where by default the computer will try and get an IP address through DHCP, and if that fails, and it probably would on the work network where the user is going to have a statically assigned address, it'll fail over to the alternate config. Now by default in Windows, alternate config is set to automatic private IP addressing, that 169.254 network. But you do have an option to have the alternate config as a static setup, which could then be the static address they need at work. So that sounds good. The second option, where we create a script that goes and figures out what network it's in and applies the correct setting, that could be done, but it sounds like a lot of work when a particular setup in Windows that exists already could be used instead. So I'm going to eliminate that because of the extra work when a simpler solution already exists. Don't get me wrong, developing the ability to do scripting and automation, very good for your career. But at the same time, you don't need to design a better mousetrap. You don't need to reinvent the wheel when a solution already exists. Option A. Not everything needs to be automated. Not everything needs to be scripted. Some things just need to be done with the existing tools. Next, a user's weather app is not updating correctly when coming to the office. Concerned, this may cause issues for work apps. The user asks a technician to see what is the problem. The technician notices that the weather app is updating, but showing the weather near the user's home and not the office. What would most likely be the cause of this? Mobile data is disabled, flight mode is enabled, location services is disabled, or the app needs to be updated. Okay, so I doubt that mobile data has been disabled. And the reason why I doubt that is because the app is still updating, it's just still thinking it's at the user's home location. I don't think it's flight mode because the app is still updating. Flight mode would turn off all wireless communications. The app needing to be updated? Maybe, but the app is still working. So an update is not necessarily going to fix this issue. Location services being turned off though, that does align pretty well. The user's app is still updating, but it thinks they're at home. The person might have turned off location services by accident. So that makes a lot of sense given the symptoms. The app needs to be updated? Maybe. But I've noticed that a lot of apps, especially things like weather apps, they'll work fine even if you haven't updated them. So it's more likely the location services have been turned off on the phone. And it's a very easy setting to accidentally turn off as well, especially if it's right next to the Wi-Fi or the mobile data options. So that's probably the best choice there. Next up, the IT department wants to implement a secure Windows computer to act as a jump box, allowing them to remote into it to remotely access a variety of other systems. That will include Windows clients, Windows servers, Linux servers, and macOS clients. Which remote access method will work best for the jump box? Okay, so their main focus is how shall we access the jump box? Doesn't seem that they're too worried about the Windows clients and servers and Linux servers and Mac OS clients. So we've got VNC, RDP, SSH, and remote assistance. Now all of these can be used in all of these operating system families. But our choice is how to get to the Windows jump box. That's what they're asking us for here. The whole list of details is again a distraction somewhat. It's making us think too much about what could work on all systems. Now, VNC is a remote GUI tool that can be used for a variety of operating systems. However, they're talking about Linux servers, which are predominantly pure command line. So, yeah. But like I said, that's a distraction. The focus is how should we get into the Windows jump box? And Secure Shell is not native to Windows. I could use Secure Shell from the jump box to something that does support Secure Shell. But we're looking at how to get into the jump box. That leaves us with remote assistance and RDP. Now I'm going to eliminate remote assistance because remote assistance requires an invitation in. And I'm not so mad about an invite to get in being necessary. RDP into the Windows jump box and then something else to get to the servers or the Mac OS machines, or the Linux machines, or the Windows clients can be used from there. So, RDP. This is an example of a question in the CompTIA exam where you might want to try and simplify what they're looking for. The extra details are distracting and overcomplicating the question, but RDP would be the best here. Then we have a technician that is troubleshooting a user's Windows 11 laptop that is experiencing issues accessing domain resources. When they connect an Ethernet cable, they can access domain resources, but when they connect to the office Wi-Fi, they cannot access domain resources, but they can still browse the internet. What is most likely the cause of this issue? Let's have a look. The user is signed into a Microsoft account. The user's Wi-Fi MAC address is being blocked. A security policy is preventing the user from accessing the domain resources wirelessly, or the Wi-Fi is set to a public network for network location. So let's eliminate things that it definitely can't be and then work out which one it could be. And I don't see a reference to the fact the person is using a Microsoft account, so I'm eliminating that. Also, it says they're swapping between Ethernet and Wi-Fi. That's not magically going to swap you from a domain account to a Microsoft Cloud account. So I don't think it's that. The user's Wi-Fi MAC address is being blocked, while then the user wouldn't be able to do anything wirelessly. And it says here they can still browse the internet, so it's definitely not that. So that leaves us with a security policy preventing the user from accessing domain resources wirelessly. This is possible, but then we would have more users complaining. So I doubt it's that one. Whereas the Wi-Fi on the user's laptop being set to recognizing that location as a public network, that could be, because in that situation, if Windows thinks that Wi-Fi is a public network, it'll block domain protocols and services automatically in the Windows firewall. So that does make a lot of sense. And it would be specific to that one user, which again, this question makes me think it is just one user, because they're not talking about many users. They say the technician is troubleshooting a user's Windows 11 laptop, not one of many. So D makes the most sense in this situation. Then we have an organization that has experienced several significant and varied attacks on their network since adopting mobile devices like smartphones and tablets. What could be done to reduce these attacks? So the options are requiring the users to have a screen lock, deploying a mobile application management solution or an MAM, deploying a mobile device manager or an MDM, and blocking smartphones and tablets on the organization's Wi-Fi networks. Pause if you want to think about this, but let's work through it. So the organization has been experiencing attacks on the network since adopting mobile devices, which makes me feel, okay, these devices probably are not being well managed. So I'm gravitating straight away towards B and C. Now the reason why I don't think it's A is a screen lock's not going to have much to do with the organization being attacked. It would definitely prevent somebody from easily using the device in the event of it being lost or stolen, but it doesn't seem to be the case here. They're being attacked regularly and with various techniques. So I don't think a screen lock's going to make a big difference there. Blocking smartphones and tablets on the Wi-Fi, well then what's the point of having smartphones and tablets in the workplace if they're all on cellular? So I'm not feeling strong about that one. Judging by this question, I think they probably need to tighten down their mobile devices a bit, in which case an MDM would make more sense, and an MAM can always be done later. Mobile Device Manager acts like Active Directory or any sort of domain controller service to govern smartphones and tablets. MAM just controls what applications may or may not be installed. It's basically like running your own internal organizational app store. So I'm feeling pretty strong about option C there. An MDM would definitely make the devices more secure and possibly make them less likely to be an attack vector, which is what it sounds like is happening in this question. So I'm going with that option for this one. Let's move along. Next up, upon detecting a major security breach, what should a technician do first? Choose 2. Ooh. Photograph the scene, escalate to the security team, reboot the affected systems, initiate evidence collection, and begin securing the scene to prevent tampering. Alright, so looking at all these options, these are all valid things that a technician could potentially be doing, except for rebooting the affected system. As soon as you realize that you are dealing with a security breach, You don't want to reboot that system because that could erase potential evidence that the forensics team or the incident response team may want to collect. Now, if during the course of troubleshooting, while you believe this thing might just be a performance problem and you reboot the system, that's okay. It's not a crime, even if it turns out to have been a security breach later on. But as soon as you realize for certain, oh yeah, this is a security breach, you don't reboot. So that takes out one of the 5 options here. Now we've got to choose the first 2 that a technician should do when they realize this thing is a security incident. And notifying the security team, that sounds quite good. Photographing the scene, I would be okay with that, but I also want to make sure that no one can tamper with the scene before I worry about photographing it. So that makes me feel that beginning to secure the scene to prevent tampering would make a lot of sense. Evidence collection being began, I would leave that to the response team or the forensics team if we're going to bring forensics in. So for my first reactions, I would definitely make sure we notify the security team about the issue. I'd make sure it can't be tampered with, and then I'd also photograph it to prove to them this is what the scene looked like when I was here. But we're asking for the first 2 things, which in my opinion would be escalate and secure it so it can't be tampered with. Then I would do the photographs, but they're only asking for 2 of the options here, not more than them. So always remind yourself, if you've got like maybe a third choice here when you've got to pick 2, what should you do first? Escalate, begin securing the scene. Then the photographing of it would be more useful. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. Let's move along. Ooh, another lengthy scenario. A user connects a second monitor to their laptop via HDMI. Cool. The second monitor is to the left of their laptop. When they move the mouse cursor to the left of their laptop display towards the second monitor, I'm losing track of things. And you might be too. So if that happens, maybe start sketching out what they're describing to you. So let's have a laptop. And let's have a monitor. Okay, let's go back to the description. So the second monitor is to the left of the laptop. Fantastic. The monitor is to the left of my very ugly laptop. When they move the cursor to the left of their laptop display towards the second monitor, it doesn't move over. So they're going to that side and it's not moving over. When they move the cursor to the right of their laptop display, so they're going there, it appears on the left side of the monitor, so it's coming in over there. Which of the following will allow the mouse cursor to move between the monitors as expected? So basically, what should we do to allow it to go from the left of the laptop to the right of the monitor that is plugged into the laptop? So our options are rearranging the monitor's position and display settings, changing the HDMI input for the monitor, updating the display driver, and repositioning the monitor to the right-hand side of the laptop. I don't think the display driver is going to make much difference. This is normal behavior in Windows, so I don't think it's a software-related issue. The changing of the HDMI input on the monitor, I don't think that's going to make much difference. It's just going to change it from HDMI 1 to HDMI 2 if it's got 2 or more HDMI inputs. So that leaves us with A and D as our 2 options. Now we could reposition the laptop, so we could move the laptop to the left side of the monitor or move the monitor to the right side of the laptop. But all that's going to do is just rearrange the physical environment to make it suit the computer. The computer should adapt to the physical environment. We could very easily just go into the display settings in the operating system, chances are it's Windows, and click and drag where that second monitor is in relation to the primary monitor. And that would automatically control at which border does the cursor cross over. So I'm going for option A because it's going to be the most straightforward thing to do. Plus also the user might want the monitor on the left of the laptop. So repositioning is not necessarily the desirable choice. Yes, it would work, but is it the most desirable choice? I don't think so. Moving along. An IT technician at the school has been requested to procure laptop computers for the school to issue to the students. This is becoming very common nowadays. The devices will remain the school's property and are to be handed back to the school at the end of every academic year for repair, replacement when needed, and reissuing for the next year. Which of the following would be the ideal type of laptop for this requirement? Alright, so Ultrabooks running Ubuntu, laptops running Windows 11 Education Edition, a MacBook Air laptop running Mac OS, well that's not a surprise, and Chromebooks running Google Chrome OS. Now the reason why I say MacBooks running Mac OS is not a surprise, closed ecosystem. Now, this is for a school, and this is an expensive option. Ultrabooks, and then you want to include Ubuntu, which is going to be unfamiliar to the average school kid. Nah, just on the price point alone, I'm not mad about that. And the same is also true for Mac OS. It's an expensive solution. So we could either get ordinary Windows laptops running Education Edition or Chromebooks. I'm going to gravitate towards the Chromebooks. They are cheap, they are easy to replace, they are easy to repair if necessary, and chances are we'll have all the capabilities necessary for this solution. So what we're looking at here is a pretty straightforward option. And also, because it's Chromebooks, just sign out of the account, sign into a new one, da-da. Chromebooks don't store much data locally, whereas a Windows 11 laptop, even if it's running Education Edition, will have some local data, which is going to require more of the school's IT technicians' time to clear everything so that you're not giving the next kid the old kid's data. So the Chromebooks are the most sensible choice there, especially considering I know that the machines will probably very easily get damaged, and a Chromebook will be a lot cheaper to replace than a MacBook or a laptop or an Ultrabook running Ubuntu. Next, which of the following options for wireless encryption offers the best protection, but only for newer wireless clients? So we're probably going to see some wireless encryption options here. So we've got WPS, WPA3, WPA2, and WEP. I'm hoping a lot of you are gravitating straight towards WPA3. That is the newer form of wireless encryption which offers us the best protection at the moment. But the fact about the newer devices, would that be true? Yes, because you've got to be Wi-Fi 6 or 802.11ax. WPA3 is not well supported on older wireless LAN standards. So it's going to give us the best protection, but you're going to have a fairly new device. WPA2 has been around for a while. It's pretty good still, but it's not as good as WPA3, and it's quite widely supported now. WEP, very widely supported, but terrible security. WPS, personally I hate it, and it doesn't fit the questions criteria. So WPA3 is the best option. Next up, after replacing a faulty power supply unit, PSU, that kept causing a computer to shut down unexpectedly, the computer has been displaying errors while booting. The technician suspects file corruption is the cause. Could well be, if the computer's been shutting down unexpectedly, that will lead to data corruption. After getting into the boot recovery menu for Windows, what could the technician try first? So, options from the boot recovery menu would be refreshing the PC, using System Restore, using SFC, and reimaging the computer. I'm not mad about reimaging the computer because that's going to wipe the data and reinstall everything and require a fresh setup. We want to try and recover the system, not rebuild the system. And the same is also true for refreshing the PC. The refresh is just a local reimage, basically, or reinstallation. So that leaves us with System Restore and SFC. But if we suspect that file corruption has occurred, a System Restore is just going to revert things, but not necessarily restore corrupted files. That is literally what SFC does, though. System File Checker is a command line utility that can go and scan for, look, and possibly try and repair and recover corrupted files. So let's go with SFC and leave System Restore out of the equation. System Restore is more useful when you've installed something or updated something that's caused a problem and you want to revert back to that previous point in time. But SFC would definitely work better at recovering files, especially with a hardware fault leading to data corruption in an operating system. Definitely be a much better solution there. Next up, a technician wants to ensure that a Windows 11 workstation has a screensaver lock enabled. Okay. Which of the options should be checked to ensure the setting is in use? Alright, so basically, where would you go to check your screensaver settings is what they're asking. Well, it wouldn't be the ease of access settings. That's for visual and motor control issues. Updates and security? No. They're making it sound security related, but it's a setting of the screensaver to display the lock screen on resume. So it'll either be display or personalization. Now, even though it's a screensaver, it's actually a personalization option, because you can always choose what your screensaver looks like, assuming that hasn't been locked off to you. And then you can enable and disable the display lock screen on resume setting there. It's a personalization setting. Display settings more about resolution, monitor orientation, visual element scaling, stuff like that. but not really the screensaver. The screensaver is going to be tucked away under the personalization settings menu in Windows 11. Then, which of the following utilities can a technician use to ensure that a domain-joined Windows client has the latest policies and configurations applied? So let's see what we get here. Now, in a domain environment with Windows, the tool used to apply policies and configuration is usually group policy. And we're seeing GP here. So that keeps these three commands in the running to be the answer. psexec or PowerShell execution. That's not got anything to do with applying group policy settings. Alright, so let's see. To ensure that policies and configurations have been applied. So we want to make sure the settings have been applied. GP update and GP result would be my two options. GP edit's the tool to go and edit and create a group policy. So I'm going to eliminate that. Now, I want to make sure the policies are applied. So I can look at either the results and see what the current policies are. I could say GP update to trigger an update. I would probably want to trigger an update first and then check if it's been applied. So I'm going to go with GP update to make the policies apply. And usually I will get some output as that's happening. And then I can always run GP result to check what group policies were brought in and applied correctly to this machine. So I'm going to go for the update option to make sure it's been done. And if it's already been done, it's not going to repeat itself. It's just going to say, yeah, up to date already. GP result, on the other hand, will just tell me whether I'm on the latest or I need to do it. The technician wants to verify and make sure it's happened. Alright, which operating system can only be found on the vendor's own hardware? Okay, so we're probably going to get a couple of operating systems here. So pause if you want to. But our options are Chrome OS, Mac OS, Windows, and Linux. Okay, Windows, you're probably already used to seeing that on plenty of different manufacturers' computers. And Linux, yep, you can put that on anything you like, as long as the hardware supports it. So that leaves us with Mac OS and Chrome OS. Now, a lot of you are probably gravitating towards Apple with Mac OS, and you'd be right. But some of you might still be thinking, but isn't Chrome OS also a limited option? Well, the thing is, yes, Chrome OS is only found on a Chromebook, but Google partners with several manufacturers to produce Chromebooks. So you will find Chrome OS on several vendors' hardware. Whereas Mac OS, it's only ever on Apple's hardware. They're very, very pedantic about that. But that was our last question.
So, that was 50 questions to help you prepare for this exam. Hopefully it helps you get more prepared and ready for this exam, and please let me know how it goes. And if you have any friends, family members, colleagues or peers that are interested in doing the CompTIA A+ certification, don't be afraid to share these videos with them. Otherwise though, I'd like to say thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.